command that they have come and our world is turned upside down. But you know, if this were reported by Baptists in our newspapers, the report would be not that the world has been turned upside down, but that the world has been turned right side up. Do you see? This is why it's so important. What's at stake is not just the ministry of First Baptist Church. What's at stake is the ministry of the valley. What's at stake is the ministry of the world. That's how come we, one body, have to be committed to God's last command. We have to make it our first priority. And in doing so, we're told that the world can be turned right side up for Jesus Christ. One more Bible verse that brings all of this home. Back to chapter 1. Verse 15, I believe it is. Yes, there it is. It says, in those days, Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples. Altogether, the number of the names was about, what's the number? 120. Now, what I want you to see this morning is I want you to go back into your school setting. Bring out your pencil and your paper, and you're sitting there, and there's a teacher before you, and the teacher is talking about ratios. You're in a math class. The teacher is talking about ratios. It is said that during that period of time there lived about 4 million people in this region, give or take a few. And so what we're told by way of a ratio is that 120 turned the world upside down or right side up for 4 million people. Now, if that be true, which it is, if you went to Richmond, Virginia, let's say just for sake of talking that Richmond has 1 million people. If it takes 120 to impact 4 million people, how many does it take to impact 1 million? 30. You're with me now. And if it takes 120 to impact 4 million and 30 to impact 1 million, how many does it take to impact the 250,000 or so who live here in this region? 7.5? I can't believe this morning that there are not 7.5 people. I don't know what half looks like. But I can't believe there are not 7.5 of us who would accept this challenge from our Bible and our Lord this morning and absolutely burst through these doors with a zeal for Christ, sharing what God has done for us and His biblical revelation to that world. And I can't believe that what God did here, He couldn't do also in this place. But the only way that He can do that is if we become a part of that. We say in our hearts, yes, that's for me. What I want you to see this morning is that nothing, absolutely nothing, electrified the early church and planted the seeds of urgency in their hearts like this command and challenge and this promise. And I'm here for one reason today, and that is to tell you that what happened at Pentecost can happen in the life of any church and every believer who believes two things. And this is coming to our time of invitation about those two things. First of all, we must believe that Jesus Christ is a necessity. And secondly, we must be personally involved with God. Remember the Bible story? It was a story of 4 guys, and they had a quadriplegic friend. And they brought him to the church where Jesus was preaching on that particular day. And the church was just jam-packed full of people. And they couldn't get their quadriplegic friend into the church building so Jesus could heal the man, so they became innovative. They went around the back, hoisted the man up on the roof, tore away the thatch. It made the properties committee extremely upset because the money was not in the budget for that. And they lowered the man down, we're told, on a stretcher. Why did they do that? Why go to all the effort? Well, first of all, they believe that Jesus is a necessity. Do you really believe that? Is the business of our congregation like that, that Jesus is truly a necessity? Do you, I believe if there's someone who walked through that door right now, and you could tell by their dress, by the way they carried themselves, by their smell, you could tell that they're down and out, that they needed a meal, and they needed some help, and they were cold. I can't believe. In fact, I do believe that all across this building there would be people with passion and compassion that would get up and go and help that man. But all through this city, there are people not just begging for food, but they're begging for God. And unless God help them, they can't be helped. They can't be healed. They can't be saved. Could it be that the reason I don't go to the spiritual beggars out there is that I don't believe that Jesus is a necessity? If I believe that Jesus is a necessity as they did, I can't help but have compassion for those folks enough to witness to them. These four men also believed the second thing. They believed they had to be personally involved. Let me share with you just a few stories to encourage you about that involvement, and then I want us to have our invitation. Some of us can be involved through prayer. I went to South Africa a few years ago, and while I was there was a church building about like this, not quite this large, but a lot of folks that were there. And I preached a similar sermon like we're doing this morning, and I asked the congregation, I said, if you would be willing this morning to commit for the next 12 months of your life to pray for the lost and the unchurched, would you just simply raise your hand? Now this morning I'm going to ask you to come and stand if you're willing to do that. But they raised their hand, and then they put it back down. And then I said this, I said, if you are here today and you can't raise your hand to pray for the lost because you yourself are lost, would you raise your hand? And I looked. And way back there in the back, one hand went up. The service was over, and one person came to me, and they were so excited. And here's what they told me. They said, you remember when you gave the invitation to raise your hand if you would pray for the lost for the next year? I said, yeah, I remember that. And you remember the guy who raised his hand right back there? I said, yeah, I remember that. The person said, I committed myself that morning to pray for that man who some 60 seconds later asked the Lord into his life. Now, I can't promise you that if you will pledge this morning to pray for the lost for the next year, that's what you will do with your life, that those same results will happen. But I can promise you this, if you will spend the next 12 months of your life praying for the lost just like you pray for the sick, it will absolutely change you. Some of us, though, can do other things that God would lead us to do. We can witness. I mean, we can actually share our testimony. I remember being here in the valley. I was saved on a Sunday night in the Southern Baptist Church here. On Monday night, my church family had me out in an apartment complex. I didn't know squat. But they did all the Bible stuff that I didn't have reference to. And then they said, we brought this young man with us, and he's going to tell his story of what God has done in his life. And I told the story. Is there anybody here that can't do that? If you went back to the country of Hungary, there's a lady there that has taken her business, and her business she has placed in God's hands. Here's what she does. Her home is built, and business is built on a slant. Here's the road, and the house slants here. Her living quarters is here, and you go down the bank, and there's her business. It's an automotive repair business. And what she does 11 months out of the year is she builds contacts through that business, and she raises money. And all the support that she gains for the 12th month, she goes to a nearby orphanage where there are young ladies there. And she takes those ladies on a tour, paying their way all through Europe. Now, while they're traveling, they talk about girl stuff. For the life of me, I don't know what that is. Girl stuff. But along the way, she continues to disciple and plant the seeds of Christ and offer the invitation. What I'm saying is, can't God take the normal patterns and experiences of our life, and can He use those? Dale and Linda were church members. They came